Good afternoon, and welcome to our online discussion of euthanasia, assisted suicide, and other ending-of-life questions for people with disabilities for May 16th, 2014. My name is Amy Hasbrook, and I'm the director of Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet. TVNDY is a project of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities with the goal of unifying, informing, and giving voice to the disability opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending-of-life practices that have a disproportionate and discriminatory effect on people with disabilities. So welcome. TVNDY's position is basically the following, that we believe that euthanasia and assisted suicide are unnecessary because people already have the right to refuse medical treatment and to have palliative sedation until such time as they die, or to commit suicide. That it's discriminatory because people without disabilities who declare a desire to die will get suicide prevention services, while people, if someone has a disability and they say they want to die, will get a lot of sympathy for wanting to die and will be encouraged and given help to die. Thirdly, we believe that as long as people with disabilities don't have a full choice and control as to where and how they live, there can be no choice about where and how, about dying, that the choice can never be free. And finally, we don't believe that the safeguards, and we see experience and statistics on this, the safeguards are ineffective in preventing inappropriate deaths. So there are many people with disabilities who get swept up in the program who shouldn't be. And also the assisted suicide and euthanasia laws create a more permissive atmosphere that allows the deaths of people who aren't eligible under such programs. So the goal of our online discussion is to create an atmosphere where people with disabilities can come and discuss the issues that are most appropriate to us. Obviously, we have a particular experience of disability and related to brushes with death. A lot of us have spent time in hospitals. A lot of us have had people impose their views on us. Many of us have had terminal diagnoses that obviously proved wrong. And many of us have had very difficult experiences in the medical system. Excuse me. And these experiences are not dealt with in the mainstream press. The mainstream press sets up this discussion as a debate between the religious right on one hand and the progressive liberals on the other. And there's no place for the disability point of view to enter into it. And in fact, the disability view is actually more progressive than the progressives, because we look at the underlying social, economic, and political factors that influence this trend, and also influence how these laws are implemented and what the effects are. So because none of the very superficial discussions that happen in public get into the depths that those of us with disabilities understand about these issues, and especially those who have studied this for a long time, as I have for more than 17 years, this issue particularly, it's really important that we have a place to discuss this. There are a lot of ways that people can participate. You can join us in the Google Hangout on air, and I send that information is available on our Facebook page, and I sent a tweet about that shortly before we started. Also, you can join us on YouTube by just looking up the words euthanasia and disability. You'll find our chats there, and you should be able to participate that way. You can also go to our website, which is tvndy.ca, and find a link from our homepage to events. Then go to the calendar and search for today's date and choose English Hangout, and that should get you there eventually. And there are, I guess those are the ways to join in the discussion on our if you don't want to come into the chat and ask a question orally, you can post questions. We have a question option, and then I can answer those, assuming that I see them, and I don't always see them, so that hopefully I'll see the question and be able to read it. So you can do that, and that also works on the YouTube section, so hopefully I will remember to go and look for questions. And finally, if you hear or see anything during the discussion that you want more information on, there are a lot of ways to get in touch with us. One is through our Facebook page, as I said before, facebook.com/toujours vivant not dead yet. Another is through our website, which is tvndy.ca. Another is through our Twitter feed, which is @TVNDY. Or you can email me directly, and my email address is tigrlily61@gmail.com. So that's how you can reach me. And okay, let's get started on today's topics. Today's topics: meeting with the Senate Liberal Caucus, and secondly, Wim Distelman's looking for inspiration at Auschwitz. And finally, I have a very short commentary at the end. Okay, this week on May 16th, the Senate Liberal Caucus held a meeting, one in a series of meetings to discuss current issues. And this week's meeting was on end-of-life questions. They heard presentation from Stephen Fletcher, who was the member of Parliament who filed two bills that would allow assisted suicide. And the panel also included Derek Smith, who is from Dying with Dignity, and Rick Firth from the Canadian Hospice and Palliative Care Association, in addition to myself and David Baker. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Mr. Fletcher, who is quadriplegic, spoke first. He began his presentation by describing the fear that he felt when he was first incapacitated just after his injury, and being in the hospital was very traumatizing. Mr. Fletcher wants the Senate to recommend the bills that his bills to the House of Commons, which would bring them up to the top of the House's agenda. This idea generated quite a bit of excitement in this Liberal caucus for several reasons. In part because the people in the Senate often feel that they have become second-class citizens to people in the House, and sometimes the Liberals want to get back at the Conservatives. And as Stephen Fletcher is a Conservative member of Parliament, this action would kind of get back at the Conservatives. Anyway, so that's what he wants, and he wants Parliament to, in quotes, take a proactive decision based on democratic values. And both he and Mr. Smith spoke as though Parliament has never considered the question of assisted suicide, despite the fact that a law that would have allowed assisted suicide faced a resounding defeat in 2010. So the Parliament has in fact considered this idea many times, and as with most legislatures that look at the issue, when you go into a deeper evaluation of what the law would do and the effects of law, the Parliament found that it wasn't necessarily going to accomplish what it would set out to do, and it would create many more problems. And so the law was rejected in 2010. But Mr. Fletcher and Mr. Smith were acting as though it has never been considered and never been voted on, which creates a very false impression. Mr. Smith recommended the Quebec report from the Commission on the Question of Dying with Dignity as a great read and resource. Both Smith and Fletcher cited the overwhelming public and media support for assisted suicide and offered some case histories to support their point of view. this is very common to cite case histories, and certainly Mr. Fletcher started out with his own. So all the questions from the senators were directed either to Mr. Fletcher or Mr. Smith. David Baker, who was the lawyer for the Council of Canadians with Disabilities in the Carter case, and I did our best to jump in and respond to the points that were being made by the other people. For example, I pointed out the fact that the Quebec report did not reflect the testimony of the people who appeared before the commission, a majority of whom opposed assisted suicide, or opposed euthanasia, I should say. And also that the commission did not solicit the views of people who opposed assisted suicide or euthanasia, either outside of Quebec and the rest of Canada or in other countries that they went to look for information. And one thing that happened is when I do public presentations, I will make a point and often illustrate it with a story about somebody that happened to. So even though Mr. Fletcher and Mr. Smith used many such similar anecdotes to illustrate their points, as soon as I started using anecdotes, and David Baker as well, we didn't use any more anecdotes, but suddenly the other, the senators started saying, well, it's not useful to hear anecdotes, these aren't real evidence. So there's certainly a double standard being applied, and as I said, the fact that Mr. Fletcher and Mr. Smith received all the questions meant that none of the senators seemed particularly interested in what David and I had to say, and so we really had to be very pushy to get our points in. Otherwise, it would have been just a silent, our side would have been silent, and they would have just had a conversation one way without hearing any opposition. So we had to be pretty aggressive to do that. After the meeting, Mr. Fletcher was surrounded by a group of admirers who accompanied him to the corridor where the media cameras were waiting for him. Listening to Mr. Fletcher speak, it was obvious that he went through a terrifying and traumatic experience in the hospital, similar to what a lot of people with disabilities go through. And for some good examples of what happens to people in the hospital, I would recommend you to the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund's Healthcare Stories website, which gives several testimonials by people like Carol Gill and Larry Voss and Ruth Kahn, who was the wife of a person who is named Paul Kahn, but is not the advocate in British Columbia. And many other disabled people talking about their experiences in the hospital, and very similar to what Mr. Fletcher went through. But our concern is, though he had a very difficult experience, it's not, his negative experience shouldn't be the basis for a law that would, in fact, put other people in danger. We now face, at this point, we now face the possibility of 3 major events coming together within the next few months. One is the Quebec bill, which is to go back before the Parliament next week, or the National Assembly when they resume. The second is the federal bill, which, if the Senate decides to push it, will suddenly come to, gain a high priority position and be brought up in the House of Commons. And then finally the Carter case, which will be probably presented, it's scheduled to be presented in October of this year, and probably by the end of the year, even if there are delays. And I want to look and see if there are any questions from people on the other side. On this side, no questions. Okay, that's good. All right, then. Okay. So, no questions there. And all I can say is this is a crucial time for this issue in Canada and Quebec. the Supreme Court is, as I mentioned last week, the Supreme Court has added the issue of federal versus provincial jurisdiction to this case that it will hear arguments on in the Supreme Court when it hears the arguments in the fall. So these are issues we have to take into account. And I think we need to, people need to be very alert and contact their elected representatives to express their opinions and be informed. And informed in this case does not include just listening to media reports, because the media has a very superficial way of looking at this issue. I think it's important to inquire further and deeper and learn about the actual effects of these laws, and not just what opponents say are the effects of these laws, or the supporters say are the effects of these laws. Okay, the next section is called Wim de Stelmans Goes to Auschwitz for Inspiration. Dr. Wim de Stelmans is the chair of the Belgian Commission on Evaluation and Control of Euthanasia, which was established after their euthanasia law was passed in the year 2000. Dr. de Stelmans has also performed many euthanasias himself on people who were depressed, on Nathan Verhelst, who was a transsexual whose gender reassignment surgery went bad, and on Mark and Eddie Verbessen, who were deaf twins who were beginning to lose their sight, which caused them distress, and they requested euthanasia, and they were euthanized by Dr. de Stelmans. Now Dr. de Stelmans is offering a tour to Auschwitz to, quote, inspire, unquote, people in their thinking on end-of-life questions. And here's a quote from his brochure. And this is translated from the Dutch to English, and so there may be some glitches in the translation. It seemed a logical step to us to plan the next study trip to the place that is the eminent symbol of an unworthy end of life, Auschwitz, the extermination camp of the Nazis in Poland. This site is an inspiring venue for organizing a seminar and reflecting on these issues so that we can consider and clarify confusions. Okay? So he considers Auschwitz, one of the death camps, to be an inspiring place to consider the issues and clarify confusions. Okay? That's what he says. Those of us who oppose euthanasia and assisted suicide, individuals and organizations, have refrained from making comparisons with the treatment of people with disabilities by the Nazis, because most people think that these ideas are paranoid or alarmist. And it's happened quite often that when we talk about these issues, we kind of get shut down immediately. People just immediately say, no, you're paranoid, that doesn't happen, it's not what we're talking about, you know, don't talk about that. So we don't even talk about that anymore. But in this case, this time, it's the euthanasia supporter who is making the link between the treatment of people with disabilities in the Nazi death camps and the current situation. And so if anybody thinks that we're being paranoid, I would just invite them to examine the link that's being made by the euthanasia advocate and this issue. So I have already put a link to the English version of this article on our Facebook page, so please feel free to consult that. And finally, before we went on air today, I had occasion to watch a video by Stella Young, who is a disability rights activist in Australia, and it was a TED talk, TED meaning technology, education, and design, and they have these talks which, you know, people pay thousands of dollars to go to, but they also make them available on the internet, and it's, you know, people who talk about different issues to try to inspire folks. And Stella was talking about inspiration porn, actually. And she talked about how destructive that is to people with disabilities because it creates an image that's unrealistic, creates expectations that are unrealistic, and distances non-disabled people from folks with disabilities. And she said one of the, it's for non-disabled people to basically say, you know, my life may be shit, but at least it's not that bad. And it's for them to help themselves feel motivated or whatever. And one of the common things that you'll see appearing alongside inspiration porn is sayings like the only disability is a bad attitude. And Stella talked about the intersection between the notion of disability and attitude, and one of the things she said that I felt summed it up very well is, no matter how long you smile at a set of stairs, it won't become a ramp. And that gets to the issue of the social model of disability, that the barriers are not about our physical situation or mental or cognitive or intellectual or neurological status. The barriers come from the built environment, from other people's beliefs, and from the institutions that do not support every person in thriving to their maximum potential. So that was a good thing to look at. I will put that also on our Facebook page, and I will make sure to tweet that around also. So in order to get in touch with us, there are a lot of ways to do that. You can, first of all, contact us through our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/toujours vivant not dead yet. Secondly, you can reach us, you can follow our Twitter feed, which is @TVNDY.ca. Thirdly, you can go to our website, which is tvndy.ca as well. Or you can email me directly at tigrlily61@gmail.com. I think those are all the ways to get in touch with us. I want to remind you that all of our former discussions are available on our website. So if you go to our website, check the events tab, and then on the calendar you choose the date, and you'll see English video or video français, and you can check whichever one you want to watch, and you'll be able to watch the video for that time. Okay, so the videos, I'm just checking off things that I have to tell you. Yeah, okay, email, Facebook, Twitter, got all that, website, got all that. Okay, I just need to thank you very much for attending, and hopefully you'll pass the word around about our weekly online chats. Please feel free to come back next week, and remember that the chat is a lot more productive than when there's more than one person. I'm just going to make sure that nobody came in and had to say anything. No, there are no questions on the other side. So thank you very much for attending. I look forward to seeing you next week. Take good care. Have a great week. Goodbye.